Hi, everybody. Aloha. Thank you very much for coming out to our Education Civil Cafe. This is the fourth in a series that we've been doing, and this one is going to be about early education issues. We wanted to take a look at what the state should do after Amendment 4 didn't pass, and so we're really pleased to have this distinguished panel here to help us talk about it. I want to make just a few brief remarks before we begin. If you're not familiar with Civil Beat, we're an online investigative newsroom. Our mission is to hold people in power and our elected officials accountable. So I hope you will take a look at our website, civilbeat.com, and we have a special subscription offer available only for this event. It's $4.99, so grab a flyer and come to the site and check it out. I also want to thank our sponsors for tonight. We wouldn't be able to do this without their support, so a big thank you to Alelo for filming this and taping this and making it available for everyone. I want to thank Sherry Nakamura from the He'e Coalition, Don Young from the University of Hawaii College of Education, Lynn Hammonds from the Hawaii Teacher Standards Board, and then I want to thank our panelists who came out tonight. So I'll just kind of go down the line here. Carrie Yurosevich, she is the Action Strategy Coordinator for the Executive Office on Early Learning. For the past 2 decades, her work has been rooted in education issues and local and international community mobilization and peace building. Next, we have Karen Ginoza. She has been deeply involved in public education for most of her life. She taught for the last 40 years, and she served as the president of the HSTA, and now she's working with FACE, Faith Action for Community Equity. Next, we have Deborah Zeisman. She is the executive director of the Good Beginnings Alliance, which is a children's advocacy organization. We have some information outside that you can grab if you want to learn more about that. But Deborah provides strategic directions on policies, standards, data, and research for improved decision making and coalition building surrounding the health, safety, and education of Hawaii's children. Next, I have Senator Jill Tokuda. I'm sure all of you are familiar with her. She grew up here and went to public schools here, and she spent most of her career in public service. She is the former chair of the Education Committee, and she is currently the chair of the Ways and Means Committee, so we're really glad to have her. And last but not least is Joan Lewis from the Hawaii State Teachers Association. As you might have guessed, she's an advocate on behalf of teachers' interest here. She's been a teacher herself, and she helped build the Ho'ola Leadership Academy at Kapolei High School. So thank you, and without further ado, Nathan Eagle is,
don't worry about
Nathan, I work with him, I see him all the time. He's a Civil Beat reporter, and he's going to moderate the discussion tonight. So take it away, Nathan.
Great, thanks Mike, and thanks panelists. Thank you guys for coming here. Of course, as you know, we're here to talk about Amendment 4 in early childhood education. Amendment 4, real quick refresher for any listeners or anyone here who missed that one, was essentially the legislature put that on the ballot to ask voters, should public money be used for private early education programs? It failed by, I think it was 11 percentage points or so. It was very controversial, very heated, but rose a very important question. So I wanted to start off by just kind of working my way down the panel. We'll start with you, Joan. Just about, what are your thoughts just on the amendment itself before we talk about, where we want to go from here?
As a public educator and a believer in the value of education, and particularly what early education can do in terms of building a foundation for success for all, we believe as an organization that the best way to ensure that every child has access to that very necessary foundational piece is through the public system. Because of the way public schools are designed and the mission and vision of public schools and what they do for our community, we think that if we ensure that all children at every economic group has access to preschool, it does 2 things. It provides that proper foundation to be ready for what comes in the academic world, but it also does, for our families, provide the kind of financial relief that I think we need to find opportunities to provide for them. So we're here, I'm here as a representative of the Hawaii State Teachers Association, because not only do we represent the interests of our public school teachers, but very much the interests of the public, and even more so our children.
Thanks. Joe?
Thank you, Nathan. Probably easier to just leave this here. You know, instead of talking about, you know, the why it didn't pass or whatnot, I think I'd rather just focus in on the positives of just having that issue on the ballot itself. One of the greatest things I think it did for me as a parent, a public school parent, a public school graduate. I went to Castle High School and graduated not from this classroom. And it didn't look like this, by the way, when I was here 20 years ago, 20 plus years ago. But especially as a parent of 2 little boys, it elevated the issue of early learning and the importance of early learning for so many in our community. I think that was the most important thing that it did. Whether it was elected officials from the top of the ballot down, whether it was those individuals who were looking at the ballot initiatives, it got them thinking and talking about why early learning was important, what were we doing to make sure that there was access across the board in all of our communities. That was very significant for all of us. As policymakers, as parents, that was a real win-win. And even if you take a look at the distribution of the votes, where you did see the yes votes come out predominantly, it was in those communities actually that lacked access the most. Their hands went up. They said, don't forget about me. I need access. We need supports. Please make sure our kids are ready to learn when they enter kindergarten so that they have a good shot of success, not just K through 12, but throughout life. We can't forget the message that sent to all of us as policymakers. And so it's important that all of us as stakeholders now ask the fundamental question, what next? How do we make sure that we go beyond this past November and start to build those foundations to make sure that we have those access points necessary to make sure that all of our children have that equal footing when they start kindergarten in terms of school readiness.
Thanks.
To follow Jill. So at Good Beginnings Alliance, we have some really lofty goals, what we want to accomplish for young children. And one of those priority issues for us is how do we increase opportunities and access to high quality early learning for children from birth to 5. We know right now that too many of our children start kindergarten with no access, not at all, not even, and many of those who do begin kindergarten with some preschool or early learning, it's less than 1 year. So it's not enough, and that most of our kids are really not ready. If you talk to our DOE kindergarten teachers, they're not well prepared. For us working on the constitutional amendment, it was really, well, as we like to say, a yes-brainer, because we feel that we really need to look at all options and all avenues to meet that lofty goal of increasing access for all of our kids. We are still below 50% of our kids accessing preschool. We want to raise that number up to at least 80% of our kids. And frankly, we don't think that that all can happen through the DOE system, or that it will be incredibly expensive and take 20, 30 years to build up. And we have kids who need access to services now. So we are for building within the DOE. We're also for building in our community-based nonprofits. We think we need to look at every possible option and avenue to meet the needs of our kids and our families today, not 30, 40 years from now.
Thanks.
My organization, Faith Action for Community Equity, FACE, took a position to oppose the amendment. And if you know, I'm a public school teacher, and so I was very concerned. I wanted to be sure that we kept the public money that went to public schools. But we also realized that preschool is very, very important. And so what this amendment did was raise the awareness for the importance of early childhood, and for that I am grateful. Having been a resource teacher, training teachers to work with early childhood kids, as well as starting a preschool. In my retirement years, started a preschool at the church. So I realized the difficulty of it getting started. But now that the amendment has failed, we said, let's go forward. What can we do? What can we do to make sure that our children get the education that they need?
Thanks.
Aloha, everybody. I'm Carrie with the Governor's Office. I'm actually overseeing the Early Childhood Strategic Plan for the state with the goal of integrating the early childhood system so that we are supporting young children's health, development, safety, and learning. And this issue is really critical for us because we know we have an access issue. Demand far exceeds supply. And at this point, it's figuring out, now that we know the outcome of the vote, what do we do next together to make sure that we increase access and we don't wait 20 years to do it. And I think it's really important that we stay focused on the kids. There's lots of special interests involved. But if we all stay focused on the children and we stay focused on keeping them in the center of the decision making, we'll be able to be successful. And so I look forward to working with all of you as you are all part of that system in supporting our young children to be successful. Thank you.
Thanks, Gary. Thank you all. I think what we heard is that while we have some different positions on the amendment itself, there is a common ground here. That elevating that discussion of early childhood education and why it came out of this process, it's a great thing, but it is, okay, where do we go from here? Before I shift into that, I think in looking at where we are going next, I want to try to better understand why this amendment didn't pass. Can we go ahead and start back on that side?
I knew better than to sit on the end. I honestly, I can't answer that question confidently because it was really up to the voter. I do think it's a complicated issue. I think it's a complicated charge to figure out how to do this well and how to be successful. And so I really think we'll discover a lot over the next 4 years as we try to build out a successful system to find out what works, what doesn't work, to make sure that we're successful. So I'm not sure I feel comfortable answering.
It's a tough one.
Coming from a faith-based organization and looking at our faith-based preschools, of which we had started one. And so as I talked to my pastor and knowing that we have separation of church and state, having been a public school teacher, I said, oh my gosh, all the things that we had put into our preschool would have to be changed. There would be no chapel time, no saying grace during meals, no Easter stories, no Christmas songs. So I asked my pastor, I said, would you take state money? And she said, no. And so our message to our churches was to be aware of what can happen if this amendment passes. And so we want to be sure as faith-based organization that our parents have the option, have that ability and opportunity to send their children to preschools that really practice and will give them the kind of core values that they would like.
Thanks, Grant.
My own hunch as to why it didn't pass, I think there was actually a lot of confusion and misinformation out there. I know I heard from people who said, well, I voted no because I thought a vote no meant that all kids would get preschool. I said, oh, that's interesting. Not the case. And I want preschool for all kids, so I voted no. So, okay. I heard other folks that said, I voted no because I thought, as you just heard, that if I voted yes, it would mean that my faith-based preschool was going to have to suddenly change and start running a secular program. They'd be forced to change their program. Also not the case. And I said, okay. I think there was a whole host of I heard from other folks, well, I think preschool should be optional, and I heard that if I vote yes, it means it would be mandatory, and so that it would force children to go to preschool, and I think that that should be up to the families. No, not the case. I heard that money then would go to some mythical for-profit, greedy preschools that are, I don't even know, when the truth is that most of our preschools in the state are not-for-profits. So I think there are all these myths out there about what the question was, what a yes vote meant, what a no vote meant. And so I think in many ways we had some of the discussion, but I don't know that we were well equipped to answer all those questions and dispel a lot of those myths that were there.
Boy, this is a complicated question to actually answer in just a few minutes. You know, and I think partly it is because it was, for many of us, such a deeply personal issue, in the sense that, unlike, do you want dams and reservoirs to get special purpose revenue bond authority, which I know is deeply personal to some if you have a dam or reservoir, I'm sure. This was something that for many of us, and some even, not myself, but us in the room, they've been advocates for decades on this issue. So it was something so close to your heart. So to talk about why it didn't pass is a tough one, even right now, months later, you know? And I think, you know, Deb's actually is absolutely right. Some of it was misinformation and the complication of the issue. Trying to explain in 30 seconds or less what it means in terms of the constitutional amendment, why it is voluntary in terms of the program. You don't have to participate. How after 40, 50 years of practice in every other state in the country, or one of the last 10, you actually have found ways that you can separate church and state, and you can actually utilize the funds without passing that line. And again, it is a voluntary program, but we can learn from those best practices that other states have actually put into place. A complicated issue, nonetheless. I think what we will find, hindsight is always that way, over the next few years, is what can we do with the public system to try to provide the most for our students, and what pockets of inequity will lie as a result of a lack of infrastructure, resources, and space. And because of that, what can we try our best to do, and what options will we have as we run up against Article 10 of the Constitution once again, and when we decide, hey, we've got to do more for those kids that will not have those access point issues, because unlike here in Kaneohe on the windward side, where our schools have space, or we have extra classrooms or land. You go to Mililani, where you just had your last Civil Cafe, they're multi-tracking because they don't have space. Where are they going to put 2 or 3 more classrooms for preschool classes? And is that enough, given that that's where the build-up of new families are coming up, or they're Evaside or Kapolei? You know, these are the kinds of situations we're finding. Now, maybe we can find a creative solution to this, but the reality is sometimes where the new families are and where the public access points are don't always match up, which is why every other state in the country has had a hybrid system to try to meet the demands. It's not about feeding one and not the other. It's about a public-private system where everyone works together to try to provide those supports. That's hard to try to explain in 30 seconds. Really, really hard. I couldn't even do it right now. And I think that ultimately was why it was so complicated. But now it's about how do we do our best with where we're at right now, and how do we try to go from there and try to figure out each step from that point to, again, create that access, especially for those communities that really need it the most.
There's a part of me that thinks that the answer was actually in the first response that Deborah shared. I voted no because I thought it was going to mean every child got access to preschool. And that is what it should mean. We can talk about what shoulda, coulda, woulda, but the fact of the matter is, especially given the academic demands and how they are pushing down at the elementary level, down to the kindergarten level, to send children into that without ensuring that they will be able to have the foundational pieces, particularly without causing excess financial burdens to the families, that's crucial. And so what I'd like to think is that the reason it was voted no, and again, like anybody else here, I'm speculating, because the public wants the full, wants it all. And I think that that's a legitimate thing for the public to want. It's a legitimate thing for working families to want to be able to send their child to preschool without having to work a second or third job. I think it may even go beyond what a family knows they need for their child, because we can send them to grandma or grandpa. Pre-kindergarten education is not just babysitting. And it shouldn't come at such a high financial cost that families feel they have to do without. If ultimately people make a choice not to send their children to preschool, that shouldn't be a choice made because they can't afford it, and it certainly shouldn't be a choice because it's not available to them. And one of the things that we did talk about, and it may not be able to roll out in the perfect way we'd all like, because nothing ever does, but one of the reasons why we believe that the public system is the best first route, and that's really the argument. Before we go to a hybrid system, have we maximized every possible opportunity within the public realm? No, we haven't. We haven't, because there are many ways that we could run preschools. If you're talking lack of capacity, where is the commitment from the developers? Where is the commitment being asked from our decision makers to the developers? If this really is an important thing for everyone, and that's what I think the voters said, all of our kids need to have access, and it shouldn't bankrupt us personally to make sure it does. And frankly, as a society, we are way better off ensuring upfront that we make the right investments. And sometimes we'll take what we think is the route to take because it's best and we're desperate. This tells us, this decision and all the discussion that led up to it tells us we want this done, we want it done right, and we do want it done for everyone.
Can I respond?
Yeah, go ahead.
So I hear what you're saying, Joan, but I have to say it physically pains me to hear you say that HSTA worked against the amendment, because the philosophy is that if all children can't be provided preschool, no children should be provided school. Because that's what I hear you saying, that it's an all or nothing strategy. And I mean, because I work also towards how do we increase access, but I guess my philosophy is it's never gonna happen to go, in the reality of our world, in a perfect world, wonderful, but it will never go from nothing, or close to nothing where we are now, to everything overnight. And that we need to be strategic and savvy and build up incrementally as quickly as possible, but I think it's an impossible dream to go from nothing to everything. And to kill anything if we don't have that happen.
I don't mean to physically pain you, and I am sorry. I am sorry to do that. However, what I would suggest is that I maybe didn't make myself clear. It's not because we couldn't get this, or it couldn't be our ideal vision, there should be nothing for anybody. But I will tell you, I've been a public school teacher for 26 years. And personally, what I worried about should this amendment have passed is this. You may personally be about trying to expand every option and look in every nook and cranny. What I, as a public school teacher who have seen items come and go, funding come and go, things start and stop, was this. This amendment passes, whatever funds, limited as they might be right now, go and are allowed to be used for the private sector to offer preschools. My bigger concern was, and now we said we did something and we're done. So while you may personally have continued to try to expand beyond that, I think people would have thought, oh no, we took care of it and we're good now. This says not that we will never go the private option, but before we go the private option, have we maximized and explored every way to run this through the public system? And given the funds that are coming out of the federal government now, and this, is new, so maybe we get to that in a minute, but this idea that funds will be coming and they're looking, maybe one of you knows better, at a charter school opportunity for preschools. As that's, in this state, still a public way of doing things, that's exactly what HSTA is talking about. Are we exploring and maximizing every public option? If the DOE is not the only place because of lack of space, because of, I don't know, maybe perhaps lack of desire in some cases, we need to know that we can address what every community needs, every community. And the amendment as it was written, I think, would have been a Band-Aid approach that for you might have seemed like a good first step, and I think for too many would have seemed like, and we've corrected the problem and we're done with it.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to comment. I think, the decision was made, and so we do know that we are going to be rolling this out in a public system to check feasibility, to make sure, but we need to also get down to the nuts and bolts, right? This is about systems building, and it's about looking at long-term planning. And so as much as we want to say, yes, this is going to be for all 4-year-olds, we do have to ask the hard questions on now, how are we going to make it work? And I think that's a really important question. And let me just highlight what I mean by a system. In the early childhood system right now, there are so many opportunities for children to get dropped, right? They may be in a 2-year-old program, a really solid, quality 2-year-old program. But when they graduate to go into a 3-year-old program, guess what? They may not be eligible. So that program says to the family, sorry, because of your income or because of where you live, your child cannot come here. But you know what? When you turn 5, you've got a DOE system to go into. But we would expect you then to wait those 2 years because you don't qualify when you're 3 and 4, right? So a child's trying to make a jump from 2 into kindergarten without that interim support. We would never do that for children between 5 years old and 18 years old. You would never say to a first grader, sorry, we can't support you in 2nd and 3rd grade, but come back to us in 4th grade and we can help you out. Think of how far behind that child's going to be. And so we have to look at this as a system, and this is about systems building and working together. Just wanted.
Yeah. Thank you guys for your comments. Those are excellent points. Let's look at a little bit more broadly. As we begin 2015, new year, new legislative session, what do you each see as some of the biggest issues facing early childhood education? Let's start in the middle with Carrie.
Middle with Carrie? No, Karen. That's Carrie.
Now that the legislative session will be opening, there will be bills going through to establish that system. And so there is a bill, and I've been reading it, and I see hope as we begin to say, how can we begin to move forward? So it's not standing still. It will move forward.
Can you share some of the details or highlights of that bill?
The bill is enabling legislation, and I think they're more experts than I am here on this, so I'm learning about this. The new legislation provides statutory authority for the Executive Office on Early Learning Pre-Kindergarten Program. Is that right, Jill? I think, oh no, you're not education anymore, I'm sorry. I keep putting you back in education. Anyway, that bill is going to be introduced, and so it will then put in place that early learning program. I know there's questions we talked about, maybe some of the implementation, but at least it will begin to start to look at the 4-year-old, to look at children a year before they go into kindergarten, establishing it on the DOE campuses, and looking at having a teacher and an EA for the classroom, establishing standards, looking at really putting in the things that have been discussed, but now it's going to look at how do we get this in operation.
Okay, thanks. And as I kind of recall from prior reporting, in terms of 4-year-olds in the state, are we still looking around 18,000? Is that about the estimate?
About 17,000, but we lost in the junior kindergarten, when that was terminated, we lost 5,000 children and more, and we'll be losing more. So for us, as we looked at the impact of what has happened to our children, those children will never get back those years. And when you think about losing out a whole year, and then another group of kids losing out, and what is happening in the schools is every year teachers are going to have to adjust. So for the next 12 years, every year teachers are readjusting, numbers are having to change. So by that one change, it has drastic impact on the schools and the children.
Thanks. What are some of the biggest issues you see?
For me? Personally, going back to the nuts and bolts, it's going to be about how do we finance this? And I think those are going to be really important questions, really good discussions. And I think, the governor's made it clear multiple times in the last 6 weeks that revenue is not keeping up with spending. And so we are facing a challenge there to figure out how to do this and do it well and create that plan. So I'm really excited about this bill. I think it's important. It was needed. Language changes were needed because it is a public option at this point. But in terms of the challenge, it's going to be the financing.
And I do. I think it's the financing, and I think the financing comes right in line with the idea of what we need is systems building. So what we need to look at is really what do we aspire to as a state for all of our children. That's the long-term plan. But let's talk about what we can do right now. And really, and this is, I guess, probably the biggest challenge that I have and continue to run into as a public educator. We pay a lot of lip service to how important our children are. We pay a lot of lip service to the importance of public education. But what we're describing as a need here is to really rethink what the system is and to stop paying it lip service. And by that I mean, and I always, as an English teacher, I'm very cognizant of how people use words. You use the word spending, and I'm not saying that you're doing that, but I'm just saying.
Thank you.
I hear the word spending, and it sounds like money that, not that we're throwing away, but money that could be used better. But if you use the word investment, oh, wait a minute now, that's some serious business. And I think that's probably the most important psychological shift we need to make, because if we keep looking at this as spending, and really probably the harder decision is if we're going to get serious about systems, the financing is going to be that. But again, even when we use words like financing, that's some serious business. So really, I kind of think the vote in November was the public saying, you people need to get serious about it. Now we're in a position where, are we really going to do it? And I think that takes a lot. That takes a whole big shift in thinking. And I kind of like that our governor is an engineer, because I'd like to hope that that would appeal to him. Build this structurally and appropriately, because we keep trying to fit the pieces as we can fit them. Maybe we use a little glue here, or some gum if we don't have that, and we wonder why it's not as sound as it needs to be. And that's going to be some very important shifts in thinking. This cannot be considered spending. This must be considered an investment, and we have to collectively ask ourselves, are we ready to make that investment? And that is going to be a tough call for the decision makers of the state. But that's actually what we voted them in to do.
Thanks. We'll move over to the senator, who's chair of the Money Committee.
Hey, I've had a week and a half of budget hearings, let me tell you. I think there's a lot of big issues, obviously, that we'll be facing going into this legislative session, and a lot of tough calls that we'll have to make. And the governor is going to have to make a lot of tough decisions as well. Just today at the education briefing that we had with the DOE, he was asked a lot of questions about early learning. Well, he wasn't, but the department was. And one of the big questions was, who's the executive director of the Executive Office on Early Learning going to be? Because while it's attached to the governor's office right now, just for a few more months, and it will be administratively attached to the DOE by June of this year, it's the governor's appointment. So right now it's vacant. Who he appoints to that position will really send a strong message to the early learning community in terms of what will his philosophy be, what is his commitment to early learning. Now I know he's got a lot of appointments to make, and I think we're still out of AG unless I missed a memo, or I know everyone's waiting, and DLNR and a couple, okay, couple appointments, but for people in this room at least, that's the big one, right? EOEL executive director, that's the big one. That's the one they want to know, because that's going to help to guide the next 4 years in terms of the go-to person, the point person that's going to really help to shape the future for this administration in terms of early learning. That's the big issue. Will he decide to keep at status quo or even look to expand preschool open doors? That's been a critical access point for many of our young children. Right now, we have chosen to really use that to help serve our late-born children. But depending on the amount of funding, again, resources are tight, but it can be used to really serve as an investment for our youngest children and families so that they can make sure that they have that critical access they need, so they are ready when they enter kindergarten. And it's a crucial partnership that we have benefited from for many years now. What will he do with that in terms of a budget item? You know, I think it's also really great to see that probably for the first time that I've seen in a couple of years, we're gonna have HST as a partner at the table when it comes to asking, okay, what about that early learning funding then? This is going to be really great, and I'm happy to finally see us, because so often we've kind of been at loggerheads. To actually finally be able to sit down and say, let's talk. Let's talk about the brass tacks of it and what we really want to do to invest in finance and get serious about early learning. Good, then let's talk about what that means, and let's talk about how we want to fund it and where, and what that investment truly means for our kids. Because so far we haven't had that real discussion the last few years. We have not. We have been easily saying no to each other, and why? We have not talked about why we need to say yes. And so good, I'm glad to see we're going to be partners finally at this table together, because without that, our kids are the ones that lose out. So, you know, as we come together to talk about that public pre-K bill that Karen was talking about, what that does is set up the framework for those 21 classrooms statewide that we have had for the last year, for the benefit of traveling to multiple islands and our island here to visit those classrooms and see them in practice. That's going to put them and make sure that they have the best and current practices in place. And actually, it's learning also from the private sector and looking at the best and current practices that they've utilized. We're going to have to work with them to even see how we can learn from them. You know, the Transitions Conference went on today, and I'm really bummed that I missed it right here at the Kolau Ballroom, and Phyllis was there. You must be exhausted, but it's about learning from each other. And that's what that bill is also about, putting that best practice on the table. So starting with those 21 classrooms, we can figure out if we're going to have the ability to invest in additional classrooms going forward, hopefully with an EOEL executive director with a name going forward into the future, you know, and maybe even preschool open doors as an additional resource there. Those are the kind of issues that we are going to be looking at, in addition to everything else that we're going to have on the table of hundreds of millions of dollars in requests. But I'm excited. I'm excited because while we do have the tension, because we're so passionate, I feel like I'm in between two forces here. It's nonetheless a really great opportunity for us to, again, we're talking. And it starts with that. It starts with the conversation, and then we can figure out where we go from here.
Can I put the elephant on the table? The missing piece here is the Department of Education. And I think all of us here have a responsibility to now include them and really hear what they have to say.
I'm not sure I have anything else to add.
Any other big issues this coming session?
I think it's what everyone else has said. I
Sure.
think, regardless of how you look at the vote, I think the public's spoken saying that this is important. I think Jill is exactly right. I think all the partners are coming to the table and talking much more than maybe ever before. And I think there's an enormous amount of community momentum as well. So I think it's time to hold feet to fire and say that it is time to invest in our kids.
Got it. Let's stick with that investment for a little bit. Where does, I mean, we can call it what we want. I like investment. That works for me too. But at the end of the day, we're talking dollars. Where's that money coming from? What programs have to give? Because the way I kind of see it is the state has this limited pool of money. It's a big pool, but still tight in terms of discretionary money. Do we cut certain programs? Do we look at new revenue sources? Where's that investment money come from? Open up to anyone.
We all look at Senator.
We're going to pass around.
Collect ideas.
With a collection plate.
No, my take is it might need to be both. When we look around the country where there have been serious investments in early learning, it's often been both. I think it will be up to our lawmakers to take a look at where there are funds to be found within the budget. I think there are always funds to be found. And I think many other communities have looked at revenue increases, looking at, and we've polled historically on this. We probably will poll again. I think often the community says this is important. We may need to tax ourselves or find ways to fund it. And people tend to be willing to pay that because they do see that it is a valuable investment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, on Tuesday evening at our Civil Cafe, Senator Kaneohe mentioned that she's open to adding or increasing the GET 1% if it's exclusively used for education.
Yeah.
Not popular among people, but the money's got to come from somewhere, like you said. Go ahead.
Yeah, and I also think it's looking at how other states, have funded. Other states have shown best practice and how to do this well, and so we're not reinventing a wheel here. And I think it's really at this point a combination of state investment, federal investment, and community investment. And it's looking at how do we balance those three to make it most effective. And we just, the state received $14.8 million over 4 years to roll out preschool on charter school campuses. So that will add another 20 classrooms over 4 years to help build that system. And so I think we need to make sure that we're really paying attention to all the federal opportunities that are going to be coming down the pipe in years to come.
Anyone else want to add on the money question?
No,
You can defer.
Yeah, she can. Because this will be played and haunting her forever. You said this. But I do think that again, that is what the polling tells us all the time. People are willing even to deal with tax increases if they know, and that's really what the key is. Is this really going to go to what you're telling us it's going to go to? Or is it somehow going to be streamed elsewhere? And I think that's, if we're going to get serious even about raising taxes or in some other way going back to the public to do this, and I would agree, there are places to find monies even within the department's budget, because it's about where do we choose to make our decisions? Where do we choose to make our priorities? I can go on record as saying we could start finding monies by eliminating all of our external provider programs. You all know who you are. But there are ways that we can do what we need to do. That's part of it. So, let's look in the couch. Let's get all the coins out of the couch. That's one. But I think if we're going to go to the public and say, we'd like to increase the GET by X%, I think we also need to lay out a plan for them, how we're going to do it, exactly what they could expect, and then we stick to the plan. I think that, because again, in many cases, and I think the current rail situation is one of them. It was a close vote. I know, living on the west side, that seemed like, yeah, we got to do something about this traffic. And we're taking the money in, and I think as citizens, we're not sure that it's being used the way we thought. And so I think on a matter like this, before we ask the public, we got to lay out the plan and tell them how that's going to work. and then go from there, if that's ultimately, but let's find it where we can before we go to the public again.
Can I just add a little something? Not necessarily where we're going to find the money, because I assure you every night I can't sleep because I'm trying to look for some money. Haven't quite found nearly as much as we need. But you know, as we've had this conversation so many times before, whether it's early learning or even other things in education, right? One-to-one digital devices, teacher professional development, everything. We've always needed more money, and we've had those discussions about dedicated revenue streams, whether it be 1% GE increase, whether it be sin taxes, whether it be anything, right? One of the things I always caution people about is be careful about tying yourself to any kind of dedicated revenue stream, even if it's a 1% GE increase, because it sounds so tempting because it's always going to be there. Because one of the things about tying yourself to a dedicated revenue stream is at some point when the economy gets really tough, policymakers might say, well, don't worry, you've got that dedicated revenue stream. I got to take care of everyone else over here that doesn't have some kind of dedicated revenue stream. So survive on your own for a little bit because you've got that 1%, but over there, they don't have that 1%. You see that in the case of the University of Hawaii, for example. Don Young, I'm looking at you right there, you're nodding your head. You know, they wanted tuition, right? Give us tuition, give us autonomy. But what happens when it gets really tight? And this is the case across the country. Hawaii is not unique to this situation. The major recession hits. A lot of people had to rely heavily on tuition because, quite frankly, the tax bucket dried pretty much up. They couldn't give as much of tax dollars to the university and higher education, so they had to rely more on tuition, and tuition had to increase, right? Because they had dedicated revenue streams. DOE can't charge tuition. Public safety, well, they're definitely not charging any money there. You're not getting it from human services anywhere else. So you got to feed those that don't charge, but the one that has a dedicated revenue stream and the ability, they can rely on that. Okay, can you take care of yourself a little bit? Because these guys have nothing. That's always the danger sometimes in those dedicated revenue streams. Because even if it's not a bad time, sometimes it might ebb and flow, or your means may grow, but that money may not. So it's just one of those things I always urge caution about. It's so tempting because it's like, well, it'll always be there. It's consistent, it's stable. But you have to ask yourself, will it always be enough? And will I be left by myself at some point? So it's one of those things from a long-term sustainability standpoint. Think first, very, very firmly about what that means. Because it's so tempting, especially when there is no money, to just jump. But you really need to think about what it is for the long term. So I think everything, all these kinds of ideas I know are percolating or on the table for all the issues, whether it's education or health or anything. But those are the kinds of things I always at least prompt people to think about from a public policy standpoint and a financing standpoint, because it's not just about today or this biennium, right? It's about the long-term sustainability as well. So.
Thanks.
But again, we come back to remember it's an investment. And I think all the studies have shown for every dollar that you spend, you get $4 back. And when are we going to think about the long term? We have children not succeeding, and when they graduate, what happens to them? Or if they graduate, we have to begin to put the funds. We need to invest in our children for long-term gain. And so that's what we really have to keep reminding ourselves and reminding the public.
Absolutely. Anyone else have any other comments on the funding aspect? If not, we'll switch gears a little bit. Okay, the amendment failed, right? Now, where or what should the Department of Education and/or Board of Education be doing as we're looking forward for early education?
We can all answer the questions because they're not here. They're not here to tell us anything.
Do you want us to task them? Is that what you're asking?
You don't show up or not.
Yeah, no, I'm interested in all of your unique perspectives on this. Go ahead. You made too much eye contact. It's your problem.
You know, I'm a planner, so you'll hear a lot of my answers coming from a strategic planning lens and a systems building lens. I really think the Department of Education needs to be at the table, and all of the tables, including a table like this, so that they are fully present. And because they are, many times as we're rolling this out, the decision makers in this process. And so to be clear too, the Executive Office in Early Learning by statute is meant to go over to the Department of Education as an attached agency, and that Executive Office in Early Learning has its own advisory board, right? So it's really a partnership. And I hope as we move forward that the Department of Education can rely on the Office in Early Learning as a really viable partner and leader to help roll this out. So for me, it's really about partnership. It's about being strategic. It's about having a plan in place. And it's making sure that we are getting all the right people at the table to make the decisions. That would be my advice.
Any other comments? Go ahead, Karen.
Yes, the Department of Education and the Board of Education should be involved in this planning process. Too often, from the ground up, we push to get early childhood testing into every school. We spent a whole summer, 12 of us spent a whole summer training every school team to test every kindergarten child. And all it took was one staff person to say, I don't like this test, and it went out the window. And so we really need the department to understand how important early childhood is and how it leads to success in kindergarten. Success doesn't start at kindergarten. You have to give the children that ability to come into kindergarten and ready to learn. And I think it's going to behoove all of us here with our lobbying experts, Joan, HSTA base. It's going to take all of us to really go to the department and to the Board of Ed and say, this is important. You may think it's not part of your job, but this is very important. So it's going to take concerted effort to bring them to the table.
Thanks.
I think from our perspective, we want to make sure that Department of Ed, Board of Ed understands that early education is different than elementary education. That's a concern from the community, that we need appropriately trained teachers. We don't want to see 6th grade teachers being plunked into pre-K classrooms, things of that sort. That it is a very different system. Children have very different developmental needs. It's a whole new ball game than running an elementary school, is how we'd like it to be viewed.
Thank you. Senator? Jen?
The department needs to do an analysis, something that people seem not to like to do, which is kind of insane since we're all about data collection these days. But that we need to know, and it goes back to maybe this side of the island, we have the space and the place. On the west side, maybe we need to look at something else. On the neighbor islands, we need to look at something else. So I think what the department needs to do is, number one, really wrap their heads around the fact that this is going to be something that needs to occur. And if they're going to wait till somebody else mandates them to do it, it's probably not going to go as well as it would go if they were having the conversations with us. Ultimately, every community, every school community, and it was one of the things that we talked about during the run-up to the election day, it's not necessarily going to look the same in every community. But the beauty of school communities, public school communities being your first line of opportunity is they actually are in the communities in which people live. So issues like transportation, issues like being able, and because one of the things that happens in early education, it helps the students get familiar, get socialized, and understand how these types of protocols occur in their own community. It's not so foreign. And that's something that the department needs to do. Understand that they've got to participate, understand that they are being looked at as a place for where these can occur, and let's be very clear about different ways that that might look from community to community. So what it also means is they not only have to be engaged, but they also have to be willing to engage the communities in which we would like these preschools to ultimately be located. And again, they need to participate in the long-term, short-term discussion. What do we want as our vision? Because for a department that has set its sights very squarely on career and college readiness, that is not going to start at kindergarten. If you really want to get serious about career and college readiness, if you really want to get serious about competing with Finland and China and everybody else, you can't just pick and choose what they do. And one of the things that all of these other first world countries do is invest upfront, not just in the learning of the children, but in all of the basic needs that the children have. This is something the department, if they really are serious about career and college readiness, needs to get on board with.
Good.
Just real quick, college and career ready starts from birth, starts from prenatal, so I want to put that on the table. But I also think when we talk about doing an analysis, a really solid statewide analysis, I just got an earful from a woman. I just got back from Hilo. And I got an earful from a woman about making sure that we are also not, when we roll out the public program, that we are working hard to cooperate with Head Start and make sure that we are not displacing classrooms, but that we are making sure that we are providing, we're building capacity, right? So that's really important too, is making sure that the department looks at what's already in existence and then builds the system around what's working and what's successful.
Sure, that's a great point.
Expanding, not supplanting.
Right.
And if I could just add to, you know, I think it's important. I know the department and the board, they feel like at times that the weight of the world's on their shoulder, as I think every public school teacher and preschool teacher at times may feel. I give every teacher credit for the work that they do. I have a hard enough time with my 2 sons. I don't know how you all do it with the kids that you folks have. It is absolutely amazing. But if we're really going to be successful, if we're really going to commit ourselves to truly having a P20 community, a continuum, well, then we have to be serious about it. Like you said, not just lip service and saying P20 is cool and that's what we're all about. We're all going to get to that 55 by 25 goal in terms of college readiness. No, it's about being real. It's about breaking down those silos between pre-K, K-12, and higher education. And so that means that between early learning and kindergarten, we have to have those conversations and those relationships, you know, and we have to start talking with each other about every single child, you know, before they even hit that kindergarten classroom. So by the time they hit that kindergarten classroom, you know more about someone's son and daughter than you ever thought you wanted to know, in addition to the assessment that you're probably giving that child already, but you know the history and the background, you've got that relationship, because maybe you've already had that communication with those providers already, hopefully, and that's going to enrich the experience. You know, and I just think about how when my oldest son started kindergarten and you have to fill out the forms, I don't know how many of you have done that recently, but they ask, what's the background on your child? What kind of early learning experience have they had? Anything interesting you want to say? I think I actually attached his preschool assessments, and they probably thought I was neurotic. But that's the kind of thing, I think those kinds of conversations should not be happening just at the parent level, but between our early learning providers and our schools. And I would love to see that happening. I know we're starting to get that conversation with our Head Start community and our schools. We're having that happen with our public pre-K programs and obviously their counterparts, K-12. But that's the synergies that's going to happen if we get the DOE and the Board of Education on board and recognizing that this is about blurring those lines of divide between P and K and seeing it as seamless at this particular point. So I'm excited to see where we're going to go with this in terms of making it a very smooth transition between early learning and kindergarten, especially as we seek to increase that access for those children.
Yes, and I really agree. We have to have it seamless. So many times, the K-12 schools see kindergarten as a start, and then all the standards are being pushed down to kindergarten. And when you know that those standards are not appropriate, they're not developmentally appropriate for kindergarten children, but they're being forced to do it. I mean, kindergarten teachers are saying, I'm leaving, this is no fun. Kindergarten is a fun year. We've taken the fun out of it. And we also know that children, even at 4, may be ready for kindergarten, where kindergarten children may not be. They need the experiences that the preschool teachers are using. So that is why in our Teacher Standards Board, we have the license for the early teacher, the early education. And we really need to value those teachers with those backgrounds and not tell them, oh, you're certified K-6, so you're kindergarten, but we can put you in 5th grade. You know, these are practices that are going on that needs to be corrected.
Yeah. It's a very good point. As you mentioned earlier, someone mentioned earlier that it's hard to put a 6th grader in like a preschool and be like, here, do this job. So the son of 2 teachers, and my father was a principal at elementary school. I mean, I got an earful every night growing up. There was one other question I wanted to ask, and then I wanted to turn it over to the audience in case they had any questions. I imagine we'll just go ahead and start lining up. But before we do that, there was one other question. I wanted to ask you guys each, you know, if you're a parent or if you're someone that just really is passionate and cares about early childhood education, what's the best way for them to get involved? I mean, what are you guys' recommendation on if you really care and want to get involved, whether it's with the session, if it's that, or in other ways? Let's start down the back at the end.
We don't have a choice but to get involved if you care, because I will say that early childhood is probably one of the most underrepresented voices in our community, underrepresented voices up at the Capitol. It's really, really important. And you know, unfortunately and fortunately, right, a lot of those working in the early childhood field are very humble, right, and they are focused solely on the children. And we need to support them because it takes a lot. It's very, very difficult to find that space. It's intimidating oftentimes too, to find that space where you can use your voice effectively. And I think it's really important that people do get involved, that they find the places to plug in. You know, Deb can say more to that, but I think the public voice, because we can say time and time again with the legislators, and I'm very data driven, right? So I give the data, I show the data, I try so hard to explain the data, but it's the storytelling that's behind it about what's really happening with our families that is the most powerful. And so I think it's important that those that really want to advocate for our youngest children make that commitment, have that be your New Year's resolution as we move forward.
Thanks.
Part of what I'm hearing from our members is that they don't get enough information to become involved, and so they've asked us to continue to give them that information, help them to learn the lobbying process, and to actually take them to the legislature. So that's one way we can get them involved. Now, being involved in a preschool, I'm always looking for volunteers. And so the latest one we're doing now is tapping into high school students and setting up a volunteer program so that they can come and get the experience in the preschools.
I feel like this is my question. So at Good Beginnings Alliance, we're a children's advocacy organization, and we have our Children's Action Network, which is largely moms, dads, aunts, uncles, grandparents, people who care about children and want to be advocates. So we offer advocacy training, and then we keep people informed about what's happening at all levels, not just at the legislature, but things at the county, federal. And we send out things like action alerts so people can send testimony from their phone or from their computer. And we're also really building a lot more training as well, so that folks who want to become leaders and advocates on behalf of kids, especially parents, check us out. So goodbeginnings.org, or we're on Facebook, we're on Twitter, so just put Good Beginnings in and you'll find us.
I think all of the suggestions that have been made so far are excellent, and I would just add, you know, if there are parents or grandparents or family members out there that want to be involved, just to add to this, it all starts especially at home. And I know that's just a given, but I just reiterate it. Get involved first and foremost. Don't forget them, your children. We love to see you at the Capitol and advocating, but there's so much, as I'm learning quickly, the time's going to go by very fast. Be involved with them. Make sure that you can, if you've got the opportunity, and I wish I had more time, if you can be involved in the Ohana group, the parent group, PTA, whatever you call it at your school or organization, start there. And if you've already done that, get others involved too, because once you leave, they're going to need others to fill your place. And there's always more that you can do there. Teach others how to do it as well. It really is so important that we make sure that we surround all of our children with that network of support. Everyone's talked about the advocacy piece. I totally agree. But it's so important that our children, young children, but especially as they get older, I should mention, because actually that's where it gets tougher. When they push us away and we need to pull them all back, that's when you got to keep holding on to them very, very tight. I told my boys, you're always going to be my babies. You're never going to get away from me. They're poor little things. But that is the truth of it. That is absolutely the truth of it. Some people think, well, my boys and girls are older already. I can go do other things. They're teens. No, that's when they need you the most. Volunteer, be involved. That's what I would definitely suggest is make sure your advocacy is well felt at home. Be involved with teachers. Bug your teachers. Find out what they need. I've cut out leaves, I have glued papers, I will buy ice cream, I will do whatever they want me to do, be a pain in the butt. That is what we need in addition to all that. So that would be my suggestion.
I almost don't want to say this because the advocacy, and I get that, but I'm thinking, because they actually came, my nieces, my nephews, and the little children you've heard here, they're the reason this matters. Because one of those little boys is not going to be able to go to kindergarten because the law changed, and his mom and dad are going to have to figure that out for one more year. A lot of families have to figure it out for one more year, and they didn't plan that. The challenge, I think, for being a parent, and on this particular issue, and I've watched it because I've not had children of my own, mostly because I've watched other people and I think, go, I am not worthy. I will take them at high school for you off of your hands because I feel like I owe you a break. But I watch and I look at all of this and I think from the time a family finds out they're going to have a child, it all goes so fast. Like, it just all goes so fast. So I worry about the idea of trying to help them become advocates as they're trying to keep up, which makes me think there may be things that we need to do, again, in the schools in helping our young men and women before they leave school understand what civic participation means, includes that. It may mean, I was kind of thinking as all the answers are coming down, was before they leave the hospital, somebody hands them a paper for the Good Beginning Alliance. You can have that idea for free. Queens and Kaneohe Hospital. But you know what I mean? Because it goes so fast and they're so busy, the idea of them having to speak for themselves and for their children, that's a tough thing for me to wrap my head around. But I think if we go back, and it really was, this is how it was in the Hawaiian kingdom. And I guess it'd be easier if it was a kingdom, because then the king or queen could say, so it is said, so it shall be done. But the commitment was made that we would educate our children. And that became everybody's kuleana. We have to, I think, always speak for these parents, because as you are all parents, you know you're kind of busy between the diapers and the feedings and the not letting them run away from you. The rest of us do have to speak, because our parents tell us the stories probably in a safe place, in our churches. They tell us the story in their parent, toddler groups. And frankly, we've been told the story. We need to do this. And I don't know that everybody needs to keep coming to the Capitol to say we need to do this, because they already said we need to do this, and they've been saying that. So we should just do it.
Thanks.
So Nathan, can I?
Go ahead.
Yeah, just a couple things too in terms of access, and I agree, Joan. I mean, getting up to the Capitol, I have 3 children, and I'm very involved. And for me to try to get my kids up there to advocate was extraordinarily difficult. With that said, I was just with Mayor Kaneohe on the Big Island, and to hear him talk about how he increases access, right, was really around the walkabouts. It was the neighborhood boards. It was going to family events and talking to families. It was about setting up his Facebook page. He gets lots of messages through Facebook that he actually responds to. Text messages, right? That's what our families are doing now, especially our young families. And so there's lots of ways that we can think about improving access to civic engagement, and I think that's important. The second thing is for all of you that love systems design work and systems building, another way to get involved is we have the Early Childhood Action Strategy, which is a public-private partnership, and it's meant to support the building of the system from prenatal to age 8. And we have Department of Human Services, Department of Health, Department of Education, UH, and a lot of community-based partners at the table, particularly those that are direct service who can help inform policy at the table. And we meet monthly. We have 6 teams that meet monthly. And we're in year 2 of year 5. And so that's also another way to get involved. And so for those of you that are interested, please contact me afterwards, and I can help you get that information on how to get engaged.
Thanks. All right, we've got about 20 minutes left on the show. Mike, you want to go ahead and turn it over? We'll take some questions from the audience.
Just before we start, though, I do want to say that the Department of Education was not invited. It's not because we didn't want them. It's because we had a great panel already, and I actually am saving them for another event that we're doing. I didn't want to go to the well too often, so just to be fair.
Thank you. This is for the governor's office. When you move over to the Department of Education and become the Office of Learning, will you be taking an administratively focused area, or will you be using a more wide spectrum? And I'm thinking of the old traveling preschools, which went out into the community, utilized the parents, utilized the local areas, and because your present board is not particularly interested in interaction with the public. And how do you plan to work with that?
That's a really good question. And I think that the early learning bill that's being introduced expands and in more fine detail details out what the statute currently is. So right now in statute, it is meant to build out the public preschool program and to integrate the early childhood system. Now the challenge is with the constitutional amendment failing, right? It's difficult to support those programs like traveling preschools because they are community-based organizations. And so we'll have a challenge with that. So we have to figure out how do we work with our community partners to make sure, again, that we're increasing access for our young children. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, and also how it will involve the parents, because parents are such an important component in the learning of a young child, and many of our parents don't have they're going to be acquiring the same sorts of new skills that our children will.
Okay, good. So the question for those that couldn't hear was how will, when the Office of Early Learning moves to the Department of Education, engage with families, right, and help build that partnership. So right now the structure is that there's resource teachers in place, and there are 2 individuals who are supporting those resource teachers in professional development, who are then supporting the preschool teachers in professional development. And part of that professional development is around family partnership and family engagement. It's one of the key components. So that has been built in, and it's built into the statute as well.
Thanks. Any other questions from the audience? Yeah, go ahead, come on down.
Yeah, first of all, I want to thank you all for your interest in early childhood development, which is very important. It's the most critical thing for a young child. But my concern is even, what type of academics or curriculum that's going to be offered to them. And when it is, will it be useful when they get to, say, like first grade, second grade, third grade, where their Common Core has been interjected into the education system, which is going to be drawing a lot of investment funds, from the public. And so, how are we going to handle that? Are we still going to continue to interject Common Core in education, which to me is causing us a lot of failure instead of advancement in our children? I have a fourth grader and a sixth grader, and other parents are very concerned about this Common Core. It's not really helping. They say it's for critical thinking. I mean, some of the stuff they do, it has me really critically thinking. And there are other states in the United States who canceled out Common Core, and they're not letting it be allowed in the system. So I just want to know, what do you think about it?
Okay, so you guys are cool with me taking this one, right? I like to think of the Common Core in two parts. The part that is, as a teacher, fairly benign are the standards themselves. As an English teacher, I saw very little difference between what the Common Core standards were from all the other standards that, as an English teacher, I had been addressing over the years. You could probably say it with me because it's no big surprise. In English, the students need to learn how to write and read and speak. That's pretty standard. Then there's the second part of Common Core, which, and I don't mind that this is on video because I've shared this with the department to their face, so I don't feel like I'm talking behind their backs. The second part, which I think is very much business driven, I think it's not the standards that's making you not think critically, but think very critically about this. It's those mandated curriculum pieces. I'm assuming it's that crazy homework that they're bringing home that makes no sense and seems to be taking them in circles. That is a frustration, and that, I think, is what is causing states to reconsider the standards themselves. The standards are the expectations, period. As a professional, I don't have a problem with you telling me what your expectations are. If colleges and businesses are saying we need our students to be at this place, that's fine. As a public educator, that's my job, is to help the public or the future citizens that are going to be taking their place as productive citizens do their job. Let me correct myself, because they're citizens all the way, but productive, participating members once they graduate. But as a professional, I should be able to help them get there. So to the first part of your question, how would the curriculum in a true, appropriately designed early education program look like? We are talking at HSTA about a very solid wall between what are kindergarten expectations and anything that comes before. One of the biggest complaints, even from our own teachers about the junior K program, was that in many cases, because it was essentially, as schools could afford to do it, many cases it was a watered down curriculum, a kindergarten curriculum, not appropriate. But if it's done right, what the appropriate curriculum does is help all students figure out where their strengths are, figure out where their own particular challenges are, because every child has both, and helps them to get into the groove, if you will, of what that looks like, what a school day looks like. How do we learn and play at the same time? How do we move, and how do we access what our brain's capacity can do through these things? I think sometimes people look at preschool and early education as maybe a thing we spend money on rather than invest in, because it looks like play to the untrained eye, but it's not. And that's the key to it. So when you talk about what the transition would be to them being able to do the other academic work, whether it's the Common Core standards or not, they will be ready because it helps them with their readiness. As to the standards themselves, I go back to, left to their own devices, the standards are benign. As a teacher, I have no problem with what they want me to have my students ultimately do. But as a teacher, the second part of the way Common Core is rolling out, and that's not just the curriculum material, it's the 8-hour tests that these kids are gonna have to sit through. It is a whole bunch of rigmarole that I think comes from a very different, unsavory, in my opinion, place, and that's the almighty dollar, because somebody's investing, but it's really not in our students. So if we're talking about what we're gonna advocate about, parents, could you please advocate against that? Because that is wrong, and we do need to say something about that, because too often we assume that it must be okay because these people are professionals. I'm telling you as a professional, mandating a curriculum, putting kids through 8 hours of testing, not good for kids. Having standards, good for kids, good for all. We like to know what we're trying to get to, which is why we ought to have standards for what we're gonna try to do here. Like, what's our game plan gonna be, and how will we know we got there? How will we know we've given every child the best start that they can get? That, I think, is what kind of brings us back around to what we're doing here tonight. What's that gonna look like?
Nathan, if I can
Go ahead.
And just on that point, so we do have Hawaii Early Learning Development Standards in place now, and they are aligned to Common Core, and they're aligned to Hiccups 3 as well. And so that's important, right? We've worked really hard at making sure we had that alignment. That will also, those standards will also help guide not only the pre-K classrooms, but all the early learning classrooms. When we talk about early learning and early childhood, it really is from prenatal to age 8, right? So that means kindergarten, 1st and 2nd grade, right, and 3rd grade. Those children are considered early learners. And so this is really an opportunity for us to look at how do we create a pathway, like rather than making that demarcation at kindergarten and defining it as a demarcation, how do we create that pathway that goes from pre-K up to 3rd grade is really important.
And if I just wanted to add to, I think I was very fortunate in the sense, as I've told people, that in the various roles that I've been in, especially as education chair, I've been able to not just work on the policy, I've been able to live the policy as well. So my youngest son, Aiden, has actually been in preschool in a classroom that they've actually adopted the HEALD standards, so that I've actually gone to an open house where they've talked about the HEALD standards. I've actually gone through a first semester review with his teachers where they've talked about his assessment based on the HEALD standards. And we've gone line by line in terms of how he's been doing. Is it all work and no play? Absolutely not. You should see him at the end of the day. Trust me, he plays. But at the same time, it's a lot of integration with where they want him to be. But more so, I think, and I really want to stress this, what I have learned after now 2 preschool experiences with my sons is early learning is just about as much about educating the parent or the caregiver as it is the child. And that's something that is a critical component of the public pre-K bill, I know, that Senator Kidani will be introducing as education chair. And that is something that is a takeaway from a lot of the providers that we've seen, because it's about making sure that the parents are ready to embrace learning and educating and being a partner with the teachers in the schools as well. But I can tell you that it's been really beneficial for me to see HEALDS not just on a paper chart, and if you ever saw that chart, it's a big chart, small letters, really fine print, very, very impressive, by the way. I've gone out nationally, and they're really impressed with what we put together. But to see it rolled out, and now to see where my child has come in his preschool years and what it's meant for him. He went from early intervention to not needing it, to the point where I think he has really made a change. Is it totally life-changing where he may never need help again? I don't know that. But it's made the difference for him, and I can see it and have those conversations point by point with his teachers, and that has made a difference. So I definitely am a believer in terms of where we have come, setting those standards in place. And then going to kindergarten and actually having TS Gold, and being able to have that conversation at kindergarten with my older son about each of those particular points, and how my son was transitioning in kindergarten, preparing to now go to 1st grade. That's been very, very critical for me to see where are we in terms of not just the standards, but more so how are our children prepared, ready, how are we embracing them and surrounding them with these supports and with these learning tools and educators and professionals that we want to make sure that they've got everything they need to transition to that next step. And so I think it's so great that we're having these discussions and we have these frameworks now being set up. But it is the devil in the details. It is about making sure those investments are continued. And I think that's the next step for us really as well, to make sure we continue and we build upon those successes that we've been able to realize.
Thanks. We're down to the last 3 minutes. We can go ahead and take one last question.
Okay, now that the amendment did not pass and we don't have the early childhood experts that are going to be working with our children, and I know for a fact what's happening now with the DOE taking over and having preschool programs and all the problems there are with, instead of doing preschool, doing kindergarten programs again, where kids are not ready for preschool in DOE because it's not developmentally appropriate. So I feel it's really key. We have some great resource teachers, but it's really key for them to get there and train them. So remember now, it's not only the teachers, it's the aides. It's not only the teachers and the aides, it's the principals who have no idea about early childhood. So keep that in mind, that these high school teachers who became principals have no idea about what little ones need. They need the training. What about the cafeteria workers who don't know anything about little ones and how to talk to them? Custodians, librarians, whole school staff, the bus drivers. I don't think they'll go on the bus, but even for kindergartners, how do they treat our little ones? So as you guys are doing policy or talking to each other, remember the training that needs to be done all the way, because we don't have the early childhood experts. Nobody. We've been working in Windward to train our principals. We've been training them for 5 years. And one of the kindergarten teachers saw us setting up the training.
I have to interject real quick. Just let us wrap up the show, and then we'll go back offline, and we'll take the question and get some answers. So I just want to turn it over to Mike. He'll wrap up for us real quick, and then we'll get back to your answer. Yeah.
All right, everyone, thank you so much for coming out. We really appreciate it. I thought it was a great discussion, and I'm glad no fights broke out or anything. But I want to thank you for coming. I want to thank all of our partners in this, putting on these series of events. Like I said, we are saving. I'm going to extend an invitation to the DOE for an event that we're going to do in Honolulu very soon. But I want to thank our partners, the He'e Coalition, the UH College of Education, Olelo, and I want to thank all the participants tonight, Carrie, Karen, Deborah, Senator Tokuda, and Joan, and of course, Nathan Eagle. All right, we are Civil Beat. Thank you for coming. We will see you next time.
In the middle of it. So what happened was she said, after the